Welcome back to Wealth Webinar. This show is all about taking back control of your money. And I got to tell you, that should be very high on your priority list. Because if you're giving up control of your money, and you know what? Most of the people that join us here, they are. They don't even know they're doing that. Let me kind of dissect this. If you make money and you're saving money or investing money, you're our audience. That's pretty much every one of our audience. But regardless of what you're doing, how much you're saving, where you're investing money, be honest with me. Do some of you feel like you're sometimes just stuck on a hamster wheel, just going round and round and round? You look at your accounts, you look at your income, you're looking at your bank, and it's just like you just feel like you're on a hamster wheel. Does that relate to anybody? And I know you don't even have to admit it, but that's how I felt. 100% how I felt. Most of our viewers, they don't show up here because they're broke, okay? They show up here because they feel broke. They're definitely not broke. They just have that feeling, that hamster wheel feeling. And I get it. But you know what? Giving up control of your money, that's what makes you feel that way. And the banks and Wall Street and all the institutions, they've got it down to a science. They've convinced all of us to take our hard-earned dollars, the dollars that we trade our time for, and then we take that money and we give it over to them. Earl Nightingale in The Strangest Secret in the World talks about the difference between success and failure, and that's exactly what he talks about. He talks about that 1%er, right? That 5% of the population. What do they do different than the other 95% to be successful? It's easy. They basically create success. You create success by committing yourself, by putting your time and your energy into learning something new. The rest of the people, the 95%, they just conform to what they've been told. Let that sink in. They conform to what they've been told to do. It's almost just like, you can't think for yourself. Oh, I made money. I was told I should just put it in the bank. I made money. I was told I just put it in the 401k. And I ask, hey, why are you putting money in a 401k? I don't know. That's what they told me to do. Oh, okay, great. That's what they told you to do. What are you investing in your 401k? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, I just put it in what they told me. Point in hand. That is conformity. Whether you agree with that or not, that's exactly what it is. You are conforming to what somebody else tells you to do. And that is absolutely, by definition, the reason that 95% of the population does not feel like they are where they want to be. They're not even close. And why only 5% are what they define as successful from a financial standpoint, success meaning freedom of time. Because that's what we're all working for. Every single one of you on here, all 133 of you now, you are here for one reason and one reason only, to buy back your time. I know you might think, well, no, Chris, I'm actually here because I wanted to pay off debt. Oh, Chris, I'm here. I wanted to learn that infinite banking thing. Hey, Chris, you said we were going to be learning about buy term, invest the difference. Is it a good thing, a bad thing? That's what I'm here for. You are all here because you want your time back, because it is the one thing you can't make any more of. You always can make more money. You always can work harder, longer, overtime, and all those things, but you can't get the time back. So the money's the easy part. The time, that's the most precious thing. But yet, what have we been taught? What have we been taught to conform with? That our hour that we have, every hour of our life is worth a certain amount. You work a job, you have a career, you do something, and they pay you X amount per hour, or maybe a salary, which then can be reverse engineered into an amount per hour, right? All of us. That's conformity. Because if you actually were creating your destiny, you know what you would say when somebody asked how much your hour is worth? You would say, there's no price that's enough for my hour. Your hour is priceless. And it truly is. Every hour you don't spend with your kids, every hour you're not spending doing something that you love, that is exactly what I'm talking about. You are not in control of your time. You are not in control of your money because your money is not working for you. That is what we're going to fix today. Like I said, most of the people that come here or watch my YouTube videos, they're not here because they're broke. They're here because they feel broke. They feel stuck. They feel like something's missing because they're working, they're saving, they're investing money, but something seems to be standing in their way for getting to their goals. True or true? I feel that way. I'm not 100% in control of my time. I wouldn't be here. I mean, I would not be here. I would be out snowboarding right now. Just so you all know, I live in Buffalo, New York. It has been dumping snow, and I love to snowboard, as you saw from the video. It is a bluebird day. So if I was truly in control of my time, wouldn't I be out on the hill snowboarding? I would, but you see, I'm still working toward that. It's something that we're always working toward. But here's the thing. The difference is some of us, and I want this to be all of us, are in control of our money, and therefore our money works for us 24/7. So if your money is working for you 24/7, what does it take for you to then have 100% control and freedom of your time? More money working for you. That's the common misconception. That's the equation that we all need to understand. And we are going to really dive deep into that today with something that you've all been told for the most part, or maybe you just listen to Dave Ramsey too much. You've been told to conform to this thought that buying term and investing the difference is better. You can't really explain why it's better. And if I ask you, hey, why is buy term, invest the difference better, Mr. Ramsey? Because it's cheaper. Oh, okay. So now cheap is the new word. So I have come to the consensus that cost, okay, cost of anything is only an issue in the absence of value. That's it. You guys should write that down. Cost is only an issue in the absence of value. And I guarantee you that's true for all of you. You just never let that rationalize. We've literally been trained to conform to the thought that cheaper is better, but you don't live that way. You don't go out to the nice steakhouse and sit there and say, hey, what's the cheapest steak? You got any of those steaks that aren't on the menu that maybe are really cheap? Maybe it's a little bad. Is that what you do? Because if you were truly saying cheap is best, that's what you do. But you walk into the car dealership and be like, what is the absolute cheapest car you have? I don't even care if I got to push it off the runway. But you go to the airlines and say, what is the absolute cheapest airline and the cheapest seat? Now, some of you might. I'm just making a point. You don't live your life looking for the cheapest thing, but yet when it comes to your money, what are you doing? Looking for the cheapest thing. It's exactly what I'm trying to make the point. Is buy term invest the difference better? Is it the best thing for you? I promise you there's a mathematical equation that talks about that. But before we get into that, I want to talk about some of the wealth killers, some of the things that you almost have to recite the serenity prayer for, because there's just some things that we're not in control of. Things like inflation. How many of you think you're in control of inflation? You are not. When the Fed decides they want to, print more money, or they want the Treasury to print more money, are you in control of that? Do you have anything you can do? Does your vote matter for that? No, not at all. Nothing. You have zero control over that. Okay, so you don't have control over inflation. How about volatility? Do you have a magic wand or a magic lever that you can control the markets? So you say, today the markets are going to go up. And do the markets go up? Sometimes you guys might do that and be like, see, the market went up today. And you're like, see, I can control that. But you really aren't in control of that. So again, recite the serenity prayer. How about taxes? In a roundabout way, you're in control of your taxes, but you don't set the tax rates. So you are not in control of the tax rate. You can control how much taxes you pay. It's right in the tax code. Actually, the tax code clearly says that you should pay the least amount in taxes. But how many people do you think actually do that? Very, very few, because they don't seek the knowledge. They don't find the ways. You know what's the ultimate thing is if you could put your money in a place where that money could grow 24/7 uninterrupted, where it would grow tax-free. Wouldn't that be the best thing? Oh, that doesn't exist? You mean that really good what was that TD bank account that pays 325, or there's a bunch of them that doesn't grow tax-free? Oh, that's funny. When we talk about the markets, because I want to kind of get back to the markets, there's always something that I see that bothers me, and it bothers me quite a bit, and I see this a lot. We'll talk to people, and what we find that people kind of subscribe to this. Actually, do you mind if I just draw it? Let me just draw this. I think it's easier with a visual. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make this super simple. This is kind of what we subscribe to. So we make money. We put that money into usually a bank, a checking account. And then what happens to the money that goes into a checking account? Most of it goes out. How many of you carry large balances in checking accounts? If you do, don't say. Don't tell us, okay? Second, some of your money from your income goes directly into investments. Let's just call this a 401k. We'll call this investments. Does your 401k change your life? Like, you get to go to dinner more because you're putting more in the 401k? Take more vacations because you're putting more in the 401k? It's really just kind of a bragging right. The way I kind of look at the 401k is, I'm not going to do a good job of drawing this, but just imagine that this is kind of like a vault, and you don't even have a key. You put your money in the 401k, you get your deduction, because you're not paying tax on that money as it goes in, and it grows tax free, but it doesn't help you live a better life. And then the other thing that a lot of you do is down here, I'm just going to draw it down here because I asked earlier, so I know this is the case. You have a savings account. So you take money from checking and you move it into the savings. And how good is that, right? Because your savings account, let's just say it was 4%. You got a 4% savings account. How much is inflation? Well, it averages about 3.2%. So how much are you actually making after inflation? 0.8 if you're lucky. Now, that's if you're earning, number one, that's if you're making 4% on your savings account. That's if the Fed doesn't continue to drop interest rates. And just by the way, we just did on WTF where we talked about how Jerome Powell, the guy who's kind of been holding interest rates higher, is being replaced. The Trump administration is already nominated the next Fed chair, and this next Fed chair, very capable person for the job, has said definitely that they're going to safely continue to lower rates because that's what Trump wanted and that's what he's going to do. So as they lower rates, your savings account rates are going to go down, except for Christian, who's got his money in his private banking system, which really isn't too affected by Fed rates. But also, I'm just trying to get to it. If you were making 4 and inflation is 3.2, and inflation is kind of like a hidden tax. You see it every single day. You bitch about it every day, just like I do. My wife every once in a while drags me into the grocery store. And now I don't go to the grocery store. I don't really do any shopping. I can't stand shopping. Okay. So she brings me in there and I'm walking around, and men, sorry, not to discount any of you women, but most of you are pretty familiar with prices at the grocery store. But some men walk in the grocery store and you're just looking around and you're like, when the hell did an apple go to $1? And you're like, the eggs, I don't even know what they are, but when did eggs start costing $6? And my wife, I think, thinks I'm doing this to piss her off so that she never, ever drags me to the grocery store. And it does work. But I wasn't doing it to piss her off. I wasn't doing it intentionally so she never brought me to the grocery store. I'm truly in shock. I'm just walking around looking at the price of things. I don't know if my mind is remembering when I was a child or when I was single and I had to go to the grocery store and I remember what things cost. But you're walking around and you go to the beer aisle. Now, I know some of you, like when you go to the beer aisle, you do look for the cheapest beer, which usually lands you at Budweiser, or something to that extent. And you look at it and you're like, but $30 for a 24-pack? What? When did a Budweiser 30-pack cost? I don't even know what they cost, but anyway, let's just make that up, right? And I do this throughout the whole grocery store to the point where my wife is just embarrassed. She thinks that everybody around me is listening to me bitch about how expensive things are. But the reason I went down that little rabbit hole to explain it is not to just be funny, but also to kind of make the point of that's inflation. As things go up in price, that is because your dollars buy less. It's not really because the price goes up. It's because your dollars were weakened. Your dollars were stripped their value. Therefore, it takes more of your dollars to buy the same goods, which reflects in the price. But you see, there's a kind of hidden thing been going on. And again, recite the Serenity Prayer. And that hidden thing going on is inflation isn't really the reason why all the prices have gone up. There's a lot more to that, but we won't go in that. But what I'm getting back to here is you put money in a checking account, that money goes in the checking account and probably goes out, right? Some of that money goes into a savings account, to which the savings account, you're barely making any money. But then also, there's this other thing that I mentioned earlier called taxes. Do you know that on your TD 4% high yield savings account, well, you do know this because you probably already got it, a 1099 INT will show up in the mail from TD Bank. And that 1099 INT will be how much interest you made on that savings account. And you will have to pay tax on that. So you probably didn't even make the difference between the 4 and the 3.2, which is inflation, because now you got taxes. So you probably lost money on that savings account. So what you really need to do is figure a place to move your savings where, couple things, you get a higher interest rate. Okay, because remember we were talking 4 was pretty much the higher, but what if you could get 6 dividend crediting rate? And what if it didn't matter because you don't have to pay taxes? So now you really receive that kind of a return. Inflation is still there because it's always there, but now you got a much better shot of hedging inflation. I'm just trying to make the point. You know, the thing you always hear from Dave Ramsey and some of the other people out there when they talk buy, term, invest the difference is whole life is the most expensive. That's what you hear. Term is the cheapest. Whole life is the most expensive. And they also say that's the worst place you could put your money. You know, Dave always says that. It's the worst place you could put your money. Okay, well, hold on a second. All the policies that we write pay anywhere between 2 and 3.75% guaranteed interest. Okay, so that's what they pay. 2 is the lowest. 3.75 is the highest guaranteed interest rate in the contracts that we write with the insurance company. Secondarily, these contracts, even though this is not guaranteed, they pay dividends and they've never missed it. So with the dividend, if we add the dividend to the guaranteed interest, most of the policies that we write are between 5.9 and 6.6%. There was nobody on here when I asked how much you're getting, and I love that because, you know, it was kind of like Tarzan, right? As soon as I asked, how much are you getting on your high yield savings? You saw the chat lit up, right? It was like everybody's beating themselves on the chest because they're like, I got the best rate. And then Christian threw out, oh, I'm making 6.25. And everybody's like, whoa, where's Christian getting that? He's getting it in his specially designed whole life. But hold on, these things also grow tax-free if they're designed right. They're protected against judgments and liens. They provide a death benefit, which then creates a legacy for you. You have access to your cash value anytime you want to use it by clicking a button or making a phone call and asking for the money. Nobody's going to ask you why you're taking it. You don't have to fill forms out. You know, you fill a loan form out if it's over 100 grand. But what I'm trying to say is, like, if they're telling you that this is the most expensive place to put your money, if they're telling you that this is the worst place you can put your money, how? You're getting a better return on your money than most common places you could put your money on a guaranteed basis. The money's growing in a tax-free environment. Everybody wants that. It's protected against judgments and liens in most states. It has a death benefit if you love your family and want to leave them in a better place if something should happen to you. But yet this is the worst place, says the gurus, that you could put your money? Wow. Okay, I guess I better conform and listen to them because they said buy, term, invest the difference is just better. Cost is only an issue in the absence of value. Let me frame up one more thing for you. I'm going to reverse engineer this. Let's just say, listen carefully, and then I'm going to turn this over to Craig because I'm just having way too much fun here, folks. And hopefully you guys are all like letting some of this sink in. But how about this? There is a company out there that you can get a $500,000 death benefit to protect your family. And this company will make sure that after 3 to 5 years of you paying premiums for this $500,000, that you will get 100% of your premiums back. Yep. Okay, so you need protection for your family. But there's this company out there that will basically show you that after 3 or 5 years, it could even be less, but we'll just keep it there. After roughly 3 to 5 years, you will get all of your money back. I can't call it this, but let's just say it's a premium refund. All your premium comes back after 3 to 4 years or 3 to 5 years. But it even gets better. After 3 to 5 years, when you've gotten all of your money back, you're going to continue to make a return on the new dollars and premiums you put in. So if every year after this year, let's just say year 5, hypothetically, after the 5th year, you've gotten all of your money was refunded to you. Okay, all your premium was refunded. And now you put in $1,000 a month in the 6th year, but you get $1,010 back. And then the next year, when you put $1,000 in that month, the next year you get $1,100 back. I'm just making these numbers up. So for compliance, like I'm just making an example. And every year for the rest of your life, every dollar you put into that policy that gave you a $500,000 death benefit, but you already got all your money refunded, every year you put money into it, you make more than what you put in. How many of you would want to know about that company? How many of you would want that life insurance? Because that's not how term insurance works, is it? So now with term insurance, do you get refunded all of your premium on any term insurance policy you've ever bought? Ever. And is a term insurance policy guaranteed to pay out the day you die? Term insurance is guaranteed in a contract to pay out for a term of time. And by statistics, all of you, well, 98% or even a little bit better of you will outlive your term insurance. Even if you got one of those 30-year terms. Statistically and actuarially, that didn't roll off, you will outlive your term policy. So even though your premium for your term policy might have been $100 instead of $1,000, you never get, your family probably will never receive the death benefit. Only 2% of you will actually have your family receive that. So that's pretty bad odds. And not only that, the $100 you put in, you lost all of that every year for 20 years. So would you have rather put $1,000 in and got refunded all your money and made money on every dollar you put in after, or would you rather put $100 in just so you could say, well, it's cheaper? Which one do you want? Because I'll take, and I'm just using random numbers, like, you know, the numbers are different, but I'll do $1,000 every day if I get all my money back and my family's protected forever. You could keep your $100. Cost is only an issue in the absence of value. I'm just trying to help you understand that, like, you got to start looking at things differently. I'm not trying to sell you the whole life policy. Listen, like, it'll sell itself to you. The policy and the process called the infinite banking concept will sell itself when you understand how it works. But the problem is too many people, 95%, will never, ever allow themselves to see the difference. They'll never allow themselves to be proven that that is the better path, because they will conform to what they've been told, which is buy term, invest the difference is best because it's cheap, and that's it. And everything else is just noise. So Craig, I'm going to turn this over to you. I've said enough. I just wanted to paint that picture and help everybody understand that, like, there's just a better way. There really is.
Yeah, that was awesome. And I like the way you kind of positioned that product where we can get all of our money back for that $500,000 of death benefit. But I do want to kind of expand on that point you made. And I think it's worthy of showing maybe the group on what does Dave Ramsey think whole life insurance looks like, and what does it look like what we're building. So I'm kind of thinking, let me show that first before we kind of jump into the buy term, invest the difference. And sharing request. Can you see my screen okay with the policy? So what I want to do is just kind of reinforce some of those numbers Chris just shared. But when Dave Ramsey thinks of whole life insurance, what does he see? Well, let's just say, for example, you walk down to State Farm, or I mean, you pick any insurance company out there, and you said, hey, I want one of those whole life policies. I want to do this infinite banking thing. They may very well come back and say, well, what do you want to put in your banking system? Yeah, we know all about this infinite banking. That's great. And so let's say you're going to put in $10,155 of premium. What most likely is going to happen, and this is why Dave Ramsey gets all worked up over these whole life policies, is you put in $10,155, and how much cash value do you have at the end of year one? Looks like a big zero. But I also want to draw your attention over to this death benefit, $846,250. Well, you'll hear folks say, well, you know, when you start a whole life policy, you don't have anything for the first few years before you can even use it, right? And that's true with a traditionally designed whole life policy. Year two, we put in another 10,000, and we still have no cash value to use. Year three, we put in another 10,000, and we finally have about $5,433 to use. Well, here's the deal, folks, is remember how Chris talked about it? What if in year five, you could get all the money back that you put in? Well, let's say by year five, I put in 50,000. Was Chris telling us the truth when he said we can get all of our money back in 5 years? If I put in 50,000, I only get 23,000 back. I don't know, Chris. I'm kind of wondering what you're talking about with this whole get your money back in, 5, 6 years.
I don't
Looks
know.
like I only
Maybe
have.
I misspoke, Craig. Shoot. Compliance isn't back here staring at me with those evil eyes anymore. Maybe I just said something wrong. Did
Well,
I screw
in
stuff
this
up?
policy, look at year 17. We put in 172,000. Now we've got all of our money back. We now have
Dude,
we have more than we
17
put in.
years? Come
Yeah,
on,
17
man.
years.
No. What did I say? 5 years?
You said 5 years. I don't know who thinks Chris was pulling your leg on this one.
Yeah, maybe I'm just full of shit.
Well, what I want to do is now show you this is kind of how a traditionally designed whole life policy works. And so now I'm going to use the exact same dollars and I want to shift over to a policy that we would consider specially designed and engineered for infinite banking. Okay. Same amount of money, 10,155 going in. By the end of year one, we have 8,410. Same amount of money going in, we have cash value available early, but look what happened to the death benefit. The death benefit took a nosedive from 860 to 160. So we can solve the death benefit part of this equation in a different way, but you have to know that something is giving, if we're getting high cash value, we're getting less death benefit typically here. Now, I'm going to redeem what Chris said because by year 5 in this policy, you put in 50,000 and you have over 50,000, you're somewhere at a break even point, somewhere around, year 5. So Chris, what you did say is correct. If by year 5 we put in 50,000 and we have 50,000 of cash value, tell me how much this death benefit, this 249,000 of death benefit costs. And for those of you
Not
that know Nelson Nash, I always
nothing.
like the way, yeah, I always love the way he said, how do you say it?
Nothing.
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 So, and at that point, this is what Chris was talking about, where we put in 10,155 a premium in year 6. We grow 11,957. Year 10, we put in, because of the policy, maybe we designed it to where it drops off some of the paid up additions, but we're putting in 2,500 at year 10 and it grows 6,880. So this is an efficient banking system policy where hopefully you see the contrast between what we were talking about with traditionally designed policy versus, especially designed policy for infinite banking.
You know what's funny, Craig? And I got to say this, I was just on a little riff. You guys know I do that often. And,
Yeah.
Brandon, our compliance officer, sometimes like, you got to, before you say something, make sure you check to make sure it's real. Like these numbers I throw, I pulled them out of thin air. I really did. So it's kind of just funny that like literally you had this pulled up and ready for today's presentation. I was just riffing, and I was actually on point with the 5 years. I was off a
Yeah.
little on the death benefit, but you're dealing with, we probably could have made it so the death benefit was closer to 500,000. But that is kind of neat to me. I totally was just making things up.
Yep. So I just kind of wanted to show the numbers, and this is kind of where you hear a lot of the noise in the industry with the Dave Ramseys of the world, like, chase the whole life sales guy out of your house with a stick, he yells and screams at people about, but he either is misrepresenting what can be done or he doesn't know. It's one of the two or something in between. Because you can clearly build high cash value and it's accessible within the first 30 days of funding the policy. Now, you're not going to get this full 8410 because there's some dividends that come at the end of the year, but somewhere in that ballpark. So just kind of wanted to set the schedule just so you or set the policies up just so you can kind of see what's going on behind the scenes. All right, now you guys ready to shift into this buy term invest the difference conversation because there's a lot of cool stuff we can cover there. Now here's the thing, what you're going to learn in this study, we have a white paper, it's about 53 pages long. So anything that I'm sharing with you today or anything Chris and Steve and I are talking about, it's in this 53-page white page document. And if you want it, we'll get you a link where you can get the document.
Hey, Craig,
But
what would
one
be
of the,
cool is if we took that 50 some page document,
yeah,
scanned it in, uploaded it into ChatGPT or one of the AIs and asked for a one-page summary. It'd be really curious, or a one-page summary telling me, is whole life and the infinite banking concept better than buy term invested difference? That would be a cool little thing. So I
I can do
challenge
that.
all of you or any one of you to do that. Ask Craig to send you this document. Okay, it's 50 some pages. Load it into AI and just ask it, prompt AI to tell you, is buy term invested difference better than whole life with the infinite banking concept? That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, we'll definitely send it out. And Chris, I don't know if you want to just kind of give some background on when we were building this and working through it. I know
Yeah.
we can't name names, but who are some of the types that looked at this and gave it some validation?
Well, there's a whole bunch of industry people that we sent this to because we were trying to get industry buy-in from the people at the top. We sent this to the carriers, the CEOs. We sent this to the different heads of different groups or certification groups. We sent this to a whole bunch of people. But actually, can I just take a step back, Craig, and explain
Yeah,
why we did this? Because, like, why
sure.
the heck would we waste our time, the time we can't get back, as I mentioned earlier, to do a 52-page in-depth analysis, white paper on buy term invest the difference and the critical insights on it? Like, well, it was simple. We were challenged. There was two guys that basically commented, I think they commented on one of my videos, and they are financial advisors. They have a big YouTube channel, which has lots of viewers, and they were talking smack about specially designed whole life and the infinite banking. And what they did is they brought in a expert on their show to debunk this infinite banking thing, to let everybody know the real truth. Like, we're going to bring an expert in to do it. And they did an absolutely horrific job because the expert wasn't an expert, knew nothing about specially designed whole life, literally showed an illustration of a normal whole life, didn't even understand infinite banking. All they talked about was the policy, the policy, the policy. They talked nothing about the process. But anyway, at the end of the day, they made it seem like infinite banking was a scam. It was just like the big crock of crap. And buy term and invest the difference is and always has been the best way. So we're just like, F you, man. Well, let's show you the math. And that's what Craig did, is he basically sat down, took months to write this paper, and literally mathematically proved the difference. So folks, that's what this is. And I think we can just end this webinar now, because you can just read the 52-page document and you'll know everything. You don't want to do that?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, maybe. All right, fine. We'll explain it. We'll explain it a little
I'm
bit.
gonna head out and go for a bike ride. So Chris, I'll catch up with you guys later.
They don't want to read 52 pages. They
Yeah,
just don't.
and
So I think we got to at least break it down a little bit so that people stop getting away from, I got a paycheck, it went to my checking account, it paid my bills, it paid my
yeah.
debts, it went into investments, emergencies happened, rinse and repeat, and I got no money and I feel like I'm on a hamster wheel. We got to reset that clock.
Yeah, so we'll get that paper out. I think Stephen, you shared the link. So anybody that wants it can run with it. We're going to cover, there's a lot here, so we're not going to cover everything in nitty-gritty details, but just know as we go through this, I mean, at the end of the day, we're not giving you investment advice. I'm not a CPA, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just a guy that can crunch numbers and figure out if things make sense financially, and then kind of make my own decisions from there. But a lot of the numbers in here, it was about 7 months of working through different use cases, talking to some different economists out there, talking to people that are a lot smarter than I am, and just, and Chris and I were kind of evaluating this whole thing, and this is what we came up with. And so, when you read the document, you'll see a lot of this details, but when you're doing these kinds of studies, there's different ways you can guesstimate the future. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Monte Carlo data analysis, but there's all sorts of cool stuff out there. And I said, I think what we should do is just look at actual historical returns from the S&P 500. And so that's what we built a lot of this on. And let me just go into slideshow mode and we'll kind of run through some of this. So there's all sorts of data out there. You can pull down S&P 500 historical returns. You can pull down bond funds and all sorts of good stuff. But we just simply looked through this and said, all right, year by year by year, what were the S&P 500 returns? And what I did is I started saying, well, what was the 30-year window from, say, 1975, 30 years later, what were the average rolling averages? So you can kind of see, and I picked some periods of time, like in 1975, and we're talking 11.1. for that 30-year period. So this was a pretty good period of time in the S&P 500. So we just used these numbers and applied that to some different use cases. Now, here were the kind of the use cases. One was, what if we took X amount of money, we went into a buy term invested difference. So let's say we had $25,000. Let's take some of it to buy a term policy and then put the rest of it into the market. And let's run the numbers short term, long term, and see what it looks like. So with the returns, we're looking at a few different models. One was buy term, invest the rest in the S&P 500. Then we also said, what if we took that same amount of money and didn't buy term and just put all into a specially designed whole life policy and did absolutely nothing and just let it grow, right? We just let it grow. The other path is if you've used infinite banking and you understand the process, what we're not doing is just funding the policy and letting it sitting there. We're actually leveraging the cash value and then putting it to work. And so we took that cash value and we put it into the S&P 500 and ran it back into the policy. So you can read all of the details, but I'm just curious for everybody here, what do you think long term came out the best? Buy term invest the difference, fund the policy and do absolutely nothing, or fund the policy and use the cash value to invest in the S&P 500? Do you think 1, 2, or 3? So Terry thinks it's option 3, fund and invest 3. So Chris, all these people know the answer already. There's short-term and there's long-term differences, but in the long run, funding a policy, putting that money into the S&P 500 and rolling it back into the policy actually turned out to be the best long-term answer. But what was surprising to me as we did this study is funding the policy and doing absolutely nothing was still better than buy term invested difference. And it was a close race with even investing in the S&P 500. Now, Chris, I think before we go on here, I think it would be interesting for you to maybe talk a little bit about the drawdown effect.
Okay.
And what does that mean?
Yeah, it's been a little bit since I've looked at the drawdown, and I don't have it in front of me, but I can.
Let me just pull this up.
That's the one I was looking for. So effectively, listen, folks, I'll level with you. The stock market is a pretty efficient place for accumulating wealth, okay? Like, you can talk to your advisors, you can look at it, you can look at Craig's returns. I mean, it's a fairly efficient way to accumulate money and accumulate wealth over a period of time. But you know what the stock market is absolutely inefficient about? And this is proven fact. So this isn't my opinion. You can go out and you can figure this out yourself. And the proof is when you ask your advisor at retirement, what is the safe number for the withdrawals that I should be able to take from my 401k or my retirement assets? Can anyone tell me what the kind of industry standard withdrawal rate is from a market-based or an investment-based retirement account? Who can tell me what that percentage is? Put it over in the chat if you know. Anyone? There you go, 4%. Paul nailed it. Yeah, 4. I mean, it could be 3 to 4% depending on what time we're looking at, but 4 is a good number. So if the stock market is so efficient at growing wealth, why is it so inefficient when it comes to withdrawals? Well, that comes down to this right here, the drawdown effect. This is a very easy thing to understand. It's just people don't, I think it's easy to understand, but it's hard to rationalize, I think would be a way to say it. So let me give you an example. You've got money in a 401k, and I'll just pick on 401ks. Could be any retirement account. You got money in a retirement account. It's growing, all those returns, everything's good. You got a couple of bad years. Everything's good when you're accumulating. But then all of a sudden, you make that decision, I'm going to retire. So you stop working there. You have your big retirement party. You maybe take a quick vacation, but you then start taking an income because, you left your job or your career or your business because you sold, you did something, and now you need an income to replace the income you used to have when you were working because now you're not working and you're retired. This is a simple thing. You see every commercial from every financial firm talking about this. But now you're retired and you're taking an income from your 401k, and the year is 2026, and then all of a sudden in 2026, the year finishes 10% down. So the market or your investments lost 10%. Not really a big deal because technically, because of the drawdown effect, you only have to make 11% to make back your 10. But that to some people doesn't make sense. They're thinking, Well, I lost 10. The market came back 10. Why am I not whole? Oh, because you had 10% less money growing at the same rate, so it had to work 1% harder at a 10% loss. That's no big deal. But hold on. Does the market ever during a slowdown, a correction period, or a recession period go down just 10%? How many of you remember 2008? How about the dot-com crash? Any of you going back to the 90s and the 80s, those recessions? No, it was more like 20 or 30%, right? So let's go to the next one, 20%. So same scenario, you're taking your income, kind of a bad year, not a super bad year in the market. Your portfolio is down 20%. You now have to make 25% the next year just to get back to where you were when your portfolio didn't lose 20%. See, now you're negative 5%. So if the market comes back 20%, you're not back. You got another 5% to go. You see, it keeps getting worse. 30% means you got to make 13% more. You got to make 43% to get back what you lost at 30%. 40%, now we're getting into that 2008 territory in a severe recession. If you lost 40%, you got to make 67% back. And if you lose 50%, like you were too risky because you forgot that there's risk in the stock market, you'd have to make 100%. This is called the drawdown effect. Why is it that when the market's performing at, I don't know what the average is, 9, 10% in the S&P 500 over a period of time, that you can only take 4%? Why is that the withdrawal rate? Because it doesn't make sense. Well, wait, my 401k has been growing at right around 10%, and why wouldn't I be able to take 10% out? Well, because you're not accounting for, there are going to be down years in the market, and when you're taking an income from your portfolio, that money that you take in income, if you happen to take that income out or that monthly check out of your investments when they're down 30%, you just blew your retirement plan up. So to compensate for that, they say, okay, well, the withdrawal rate, the industry withdrawal rate's 4%. Doesn't matter what you make in your portfolio, it's 4% because the stock market is completely inefficient when it comes to distributions. So the fix, the solution is super easy. There's several of them. And I've done videos on this. We call it volatility buffering. So on those years when the markets are down, what if you just had a side fund with some money in it? Maybe it just happens to be your specially designed whole life, that when the stock market goes down, anything more than 10%, you no longer take any money from your stock market, take it out of your life insurance policy. Or you take it out of that really good TD America or TD Bank account that you got there. They can't lose money. You take it out of a place where it can't lose money. And then when the market comes back, well, back to taking withdrawals from the market. But you literally have a light switch. When the market's down, you shut the income off from your portfolio, your stocks and bonds, and you start taking it from your whole life. You start taking it from your bank account. You now have eliminated volatility risk, and now you don't need to worry about the drawdown effect because you're not taking money from the stock portfolio when it's down. You're only taking money from the stock portfolio when it's going up, which makes a ton of sense. And then you can even buffer more because you can then add guaranteed life income annuities, which are guaranteed vehicles. They pay a set income. You know what a pension is? That's what pensions do. Pensions take a chunk of money when you retire and you need to start drawing from your pension, and they take this and they give it to a giant insurance company, and that insurance company promises you a guaranteed paycheck. So the advantage for the pension fund is they have to give less money to the insurance company because the insurance company takes all the risk. The insurance company deals with all that and just says, okay, we'll give them $3,000 a month. Great. The company's off the hook. The company had to give less money because now you got interest and all the actuarial factorings going into that. Like, that's how they do it. So you're kind of doing the same thing with your individual retirement. We do this all the time. And if you need somebody to help you with your investments, we got the wealth advisors. Okay, you got Steph and you got Brandon. They can help you with that. But listen, this is what will save you from losing your ass when the markets go down if you're retired.
Yeah, and Chris, I wanted to bring up this slide too because there's been some other people coming in on the scene. You know, the 4% rule came back from 1994 when William Benjamin was kind of doing his study. There's a lot of people out there now saying it's closer to 2.8 to 3%.
That's why I said, 3%. It actually, by today's standards, if you talk to Stefan over at Wealth Advisors, he's a wicked smart advisor. He'll tell you it's 3%. But 4 is kind of the going, and I just went with 4 because that's what they said.
Do you remember, Chris, do you remember, and we talked about this, and this is kind of why we built this, but do you remember Dave Ramsey's um, magical mutual fund that gets 12% every year?
Oh yeah, Dave Ramsey's notorious 12% mutual fund that doesn't exist.
Yeah, but he has videos that talks about his magical 12% mutual fund, and he was telling you that you can take 8% because if you're earning 12, why can't you take 8%? So
I'm surprised he didn't get. I'm surprised he hasn't been sued yet. You know, he must be friends with Nancy Pelosi, the best stock picker in the world. So I'm sure this magical mutual fund is one of two things. So listen to me carefully. It's got to be one of two things that Dave Ramsey's talking about when he brings up his magic 12% mutual fund. It's either got to be a mutual fund that invests in exactly the same things that Nancy Pelosi invests in. Nancy Pelosi, just in case you don't know who she is, she's the greatest stock picker in the history of mankind. Or option number 2 is the inverse Kramer fund, which whenever Kramer says invest in this stock on his show, you just invest in the exact opposite, the inverse. And so it's one of those two things that has to be making up Kramer or Dave Ramsey's magic 12%. I don't know any other way.
and you know, we put some of the math to work, and I picked a time in S&P 500 history where starting in 1970 on, it was averaging about 10.85%. So now there's a couple ways to look at this. Did Dave Ramsey mean you could take 8% every year? If we're earning 10.85, can we take 8%? Can we take 7%? So what you'll see over here is the balance, and I'm using real S&P 500 returns every year. But essentially you can see the balance. If we have $1 million in 1970, we could take 80,000. Well, we had a 0.1% return in the S&P 500. Then we took another 80% off this 920. We had a 10%, but eventually you start hitting some of these negatives, and that's that drawdown or that sequencing issue that Chris was talking about. Well, just taking 8% every year, you actually run out of money in 14 years. And I'm not considering fees and taxes in this as well. So this was at a 10.85, taking your 8%. Well, you do run out of money in 14 years. Now, I've had others come back and say, well, that's not what he meant. He said take 8% of the remaining balance. Don't take 8% of just the portfolio. So I know there's a lot of numbers here, but essentially it's the same numbers, but now we're taking 8% of the remaining balance. And so if you look down this planned withdrawal column, you see 80,000, 73. Here's a 39. Here's another 39, a 42. We have some 50s, 49 and a 61. So that's essentially saying with the market fluctuations, we're going to take 8% of the remaining balance. And so the income ranges anywhere from 95,000 a year to 39,000 a year. So the way I looked at this is you're either in retirement, you're either having prime rib dinners sometimes, or you're going to be eating ramen noodles. And that's just the way it's going to flow. So anyway, we kind of looked at Dave Ramsey's statement, and like I don't see it holding water what he's talking about here with the fluctuations, because you'll see in here there's some negatives in 1973, 1974, 1977, and on and on and on and on. So anyway, Chris, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add on that, but that's kind of the story with Dave Ramsey and his.
No, I think that tells the story pretty well.
So from here, I want to kind of go back to that drawdown effect, and I just want to show some fun math exercises here. So Chris kind of shared when the market's down 10%, it's got to go up 11. When it's down 20, it's got to go up 25. When it's down 30, it's got to go up 43. And so what would that look like in reality if, let's say we started in year one with $100 and we just rode that up and down say we had a 10% down, 11% up, then we did 20% down, then we went 25% up. So basically at the end of year 15, we still have $100. But the real question is, what's the average return? And we just want to kind of talk about this whole average return misconception, because you earned 6.4% in this portfolio, but you started in year one with 100 and you ended in year 15 with 100. Isn't that cool how you earned 6.4%? Do those ups and downs. So I don't know if that's what you want to sign up for, but we tend to look at what's called the compounded annual growth rate, which In this case, is zero. We earned nothing. We actually lost money because of inflation and time. So then I said, well, what would it look like if we put taxes and investment fees in here? And you may look at these investment fees and think, well, I don't know, 1.5%, I'm only paying 1%, or I'm paying 0.75%. But generally speaking, and Chris, you and Steven were financial advisors. Do you think 1.5% investment fees is unrealistic?
No, that's unless you have like a really large balance, like tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions. Yeah, that's probably spot on. Stephen, I would say your firm probably even had higher
Yeah,
fees than
I
that.
remember higher than that. Yeah.
I mean, the average mutual fund right now is higher than that. Inside your 401k, look at the internal expense fees, the 12B1 fees on those freedom date funds. Those are like 1.7.
Mhm.
Not all, but I mean, check it out. Look at the prospectus. That's the thing. We always, Steve, you remember when we used to be advisors, every time before we did an investment, remember we had to bring the prospectus? Do you remember bringing those prospectuses around? You actually had to physically hand the prospectus. Now, how many of you on here have ever read a prospectus? Has anyone read one? Like you're thinking about investing, your advisor gives you a prospectus. I think today they're just emailed. Anyone ever read those? Do you remember they were printed on literally it was almost like tissue paper. The paper was so thin and the writing had to be so small to fill it all in there. Dex said he did, but some of them are like, what's a perspective? A prospectus. But the prospectus is what shows you all the inner workings of the fund or the investment you're investing in. Nobody reads them. Nobody reads them. They should, but they don't. So most people don't even know what they're paying, Craig.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, when you start factoring in the taxes and the investment fees, and of course you're going to be taxed when you take withdrawals, so all this is kind of situational. But the drawdown effect gets amplified because when I put that 21% effective tax rate and a 1.5% investment fee, which you just heard from Chris and Steven, they were investment advisors, and this is not an unrealistic number. That 10% now requires a 19% gain. That 20% down market requires a 36% gain. A 50% requires 133. So it just starts magnifying the whole thing. So we just want to be aware of those ups and downs and have a plan, just like the video that Chris was talking about where we talked about the volatility buffer, covered assets. I put the link in there. I'll put it in again. Put it on your list of things to watch, especially if you're trying to do retirement planning. It's really a cool strategy of using your market-based tools along with your specially designed whole life. I mean, those two things can work together in conjunction.
Yeah, hey, Craig, I had a couple people message saying that they wanted to know how to book a call with us. One of them said, they wanted to invest in that fund that Nancy Pelosi invests in. So can you put up the link to book a call with our team? And also, we're not going to give you the fund that Nancy is. I don't even know if there is one. But we'll give you a link so that if any of you want to book a call with one of our money mentors, discuss your situation, discuss your retirement, we certainly can do that. You're either going to meet with one of the mentors about IBC and the policies, or you're going to meet with one of the wealth advisors who are licensed Series 65 financial advisors about your retirements, your drawdown, your income strategies, and all that different stuff.
And Stephen, do you have that handy? You can throw it in the chat. Just the wealth webinar booking call.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're going to be bouncing around a little bit here, but what's interesting is just like in the last example with the fees and taxes, we started with $100 in year one. We ended with $100, well, almost $100, and 15 years later. We're not just talking about we started with 100 and we ended with 100, but we lost a lot of money due to inflation, and so now our dollar's worth less. But it's crazy to think when you see these ups and downs, our average return was still 12.67. And so we really need to be careful when we're looking at these things called average returns because there's a lot of funny math going on behind the scenes. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about is we've been showing a drawdown effect where 10% negative happens and then next year right away 19% it goes up, or a 20% degradation in the market happens and then all of a sudden next year 36%. But does the market really behave that way where it goes down and then recovers next year?
I mean, maybe during COVID, but that was about it. All the other recession periods are years.
And I just picked out three time periods which were interesting because if you look at the Great Depression, and this one surprised me, I didn't know, but I actually ran the math and it is true. Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, when the market crashed, and I've got some of those numbers, it took 25 years for the market to recover. That blew me away. 25 years for the market just to get back to where it was when the crash happened. So that was the biggest one. But then if we look at, what was called Black Monday, October 19th in 1987, that was about a 2-year crash. We look at the 2008 financial crisis, and that was about a 5-year time frame. So the thing we have to remember in these drawdowns is that we're not looking at a drop and then a gain right away. It could take 5 years, could take 2 years, could take 20 years, depending on what happened in the market for it to get back to where we started.
And let me say one other thing real quick, Craig. Somebody just had said predictions say the market is set to crash again soon. I think the thing that all of you need to understand is you can't time the market, but what you all need to understand, it's not a matter of if the market is going to go down or if we're going to be in a recession. It's when, 100% when. And as she said, like, that time is probably coming very soon. There's a super old thing, I don't know what they call it, it's like a chart that shows, and it says at the end of 2026, or like kind of approaching the end of 2026 is when we're going to really start getting hammered and go down. So get your winnings off the table. Know when to hold them and know when to fold them. That time is probably coming soon.
Yep. And to think about what could come, and sometimes we can just look back in history. And here I am. I picked a time frame from 1975 to 2004. The S&P average over that time was 11.16% average. So what I did is I said, well, let's take that same $100 and let's just run it through the model and see what do we come up with at the end of 30 years. So you put in $100. If you look all the way down here to year 35, it grew $1,626.19. So we took this wild ride. We started out with some big increases, 31% growth in 1975 and then we went down 11, kind of flat, in this year, 12, 25 up. So we're taking this roller coaster ride, but what I really want to know is what was our actual growth? Well, it's 10.5. And I'm not sure why I highlighted this chunk of time. Oh, that's where we started getting some of these negatives, where we had a negative, negative, negative. And if you look at the balance at year 25 when that first negative happened, we're at 2,143 in our balance. Well, if you go all the way down to year 35, we still hadn't recovered. That 2143 touched about at year 33, but then if we look down 10 years later, we still don't have the balance we had at year 25. So what Chris was saying, take your winnings off the table. We can't time the market, but if you think there's a huge crash, do you want to take that ride down and then have to wait multiple years, maybe even a decade to get back to where you were? And this is where that volatility buffer that we put in that presentation that Chris did on the volatility buffer, this is why it's so important, because what if you were in a 401k, you're in retirement, do you want to be taking those withdrawals during those down times? No, maybe you could shift over and pull some of it out of your whole life policy. So these are just really important things to know. I'm not going to go through all these examples, but I just picked another period of time, what was 1950 to 1979. All of this stuff is in the document. So if you get the white paper, you'll see the same thing. Here's the Great Depression for anybody that wants to see the numbers, because this is kind of cool. From 1928 to 1957, I started with $100. And if you go down 25 years later, we're somewhere around that $100. But look at some of those negatives that happened. We had a big up and then a bunch of downs, and it took forever to, recover from that. 25-year recovery. And the annual compounded growth rate over that 25-year period is 2.76. And Chris, you had mentioned earlier some of the guarantees that we have in these policies. They go anywhere from what was it, 2 to 3.25?
Yeah, the guaranteed is 2% the lowest that we have for carriers, and the highest is 3.75.
When I think about that, I'm like, would you have rather taken this ride or a guaranteed ride and come out?
You know the answer. I just like consistent, steady increases in my money. I don't like playing the games.
So that the real insights just from this section is that be aware that there is a drawdown effect. Be aware that those sequencings of returns and the recovery durations can really be a challenge, and it's something that needs to be mitigated. We're not saying don't do this or do this. It's just be aware of how these market cycles work, because it can, depending on when you retire, when you want to pull your money out, it could be a really bad time to do so.
Somebody had just said that private equity has always outperformed the market. That is absolutely not true. Private equity is, maybe in the last couple of years they've outperformed the markets because the market's been, on their side. But during any like slowdown or economic, turmoil, PE firms get crushed. They are very speculative. They take on a lot more risk. I know tons of PE firms that have just gotten crushed in the last 2 years because the investments that they did, which were supposed to pan out really well based on their due diligence, did not. So unless you can show me proof that over some period of time PE has beat the overall markets, I'm going to call the bluff on that one.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about the impact of fees, and this came right from the SEC website. You can go out to the sec.gov investor alerts, and I pulled this right off their webpage, but they were talking about the impact of a 1% annual fee. So this aligns with a lot of the numbers I've already shared, but it just says in 20 years, if the total amount paid for a 1% annual fee adds up to almost $28,000 for a $100,000 initial investment, that's a huge chunk. That's a really, really big chunk. So a 1% fee is eating up $28,000 of a $100,000 initial investment. So those things are going to be, something you want to really pay attention to. In the document, and I'm not going to go over all these use cases because I'll bore you with numbers, but if you really want to see the impact of fees and taxes, along with actual S&P 500 returns, you can see there's going to be a column with fees and taxes and no fees and taxes. And so you can see with that same $100 riding through the ups and downs of real market fluctuations, with no fees and taxes, we're at 1767. With fees and taxes at the end of 30 years, we're at 543. So there's a really, really big difference in what's going on here. So 11.16 average return, and maybe this is where Dave Ramsey's kind of in the ballpark of his 12% magical mutual fund, but the compounded annual growth rate is 5.81 with fees and taxes. So we just go through different periods, and you can go through those on your own as you read the document. This one was interesting. Again, this is the Great Depression, the 25-year recovery, where with fees and taxes, if we started with $100, and this is really important to know because with the fees and taxes, we started with $100, but even 30 years later, the market, quote unquote, recovered. But did you recover because of the fees and taxes? Let's say you're down, to $74 is what the math shows. So these are big insights, and this kind of goes to back up what Chris was saying earlier about those withdrawal rates. Is it 4%? You have a lot of people saying it's 2.8 to 3%. Stefan on our team says it's, closer to the 3%. It's because of these types of market things that are going on that, we're taking, say, $1 million 401k. How much can you take out of that? Maybe you're getting $30,000 a year, and that's taxed. So these are real things that we need to think about. The compounded annual growth rate on this 25-year recovery was negative 0.97. So before we jump into the next section, Chris, I want to stop, see if there's any questions, anything people want to dig into more, or anything you want to add to this.
No, I think we've been hitting them pretty good over in the chat. If any of you feel like maybe we missed your question, put it over there in the Q&A. I know I see yours, Frank. But if anyone really wants kind of a deep dive on that, Stephen and I are really trying to do that. I'm trying to hit the chat, but it comes really fast. But I think we're good to go. Continue on.
Okay. So we're going to jump through some of the use cases, and what we're going to talk about is really covering what does it look like to compare a whole life policy to a savings account? What does it look like to compare the whole life policies if we do S&P 500 stocks only? Now, you've probably heard too, as you get closer to retirement, you need to have a conservative blend of stocks and bonds. So we did some 60-40 type splits with stocks and bonds. So there's all these use cases. I'm not going to go through all of them because we're getting close to time here. But if you're really interested in seeing the outcomes, you can run through these. Some of the things I just want to share with how this was set up is we took a $25,000 pile of cash and we said, all right, what if we put $25,000 a year of annual premium into a policy, into a specially designed whole life policy? And if you understand kind of policy design, we can drive cash value really high. We can lower it for different purposes. But what we did is we said, we're going to take that 25,000 and split it into what we call a 60-40, which means, we're putting about 40% of that 10,000 into a base portion of the policy, 60% is going to cash value. Could I have driven this higher to show a better benefit for whole life? I could have. I could have done an 80% paid up additions to drive the cash value higher. But I wanted to try to do something sensible and say, well, what if we had a 60-40 split of our cash? How does that compare with a buy term invest the difference? So these are all the ingredients that we used for the policy design. So if there's anybody out there like, hey, I need to know what are all the ingredients? Well, these are the ingredients. But for everybody else, just remember we have a $25,000 premium that's buying a whole life policy, and then we have a 30-year term policy with about the same amount of death benefit, so we can do the buy term invest the difference. Now, the $600,000 of death benefit is going to cost us about $1,000 a year for this 30-year term policy on this person, on this 30-year-old male. So now we have all that kind of ironed out, what we're going to do, and we're just going to get in and look at the historical savings account. Now, at the beginning of the session, we asked, what kind of savings rates are you getting? And there's some 3.5% or some 3%. Christian had his 6.2 in his whole life policy, but if you look at over time, savings rates are not all that exciting. They're somewhere in the, this is showing 0.21. I've looked recently and they're about 0.47. Take all the high yield savings accounts out of the mix and just kind of look at what savings accounts have earned over time. And it's well under 1%. So it's pretty darn low. However, what we did in this study is we said, what if we had a 1% savings account? What if we had a 3% savings account and a 4.5% savings account? So you can kind of see how that kind of plays out over time. So guess what we did is we took enough of that 25,000, bought a term policy and put the rest in the savings account at 1%. Now we're using a 21% effective tax rate. So you're going to earn interest. We're going to get taxed. They're going to get that 1099 in at the end of the year. And we look at it. What do we put in by year 5? What do we put in by year 30? What's our death benefit and what's our balance? So in 30 years, we grew to 489,000 and we had a death benefit of 600,000. But guess what happens at year 31? Year 31, we no longer have that death benefit. So God forbid you die when, 31 years later, you're not getting anything because it was a term policy. That death benefit's gone. So just know that we have 489 we accumulated. If we're growing at 3%, we accumulate up to 669. So better, we're getting a little bit more growth. And if we do that 4.5% savings rate, we'll grow to 853. So now let me ask you a question. Who knows of a savings account at a bank where we can guarantee 4.5% for 30 years? Well, it doesn't exist, right? No bank is going to guarantee us 4.5% for 30 years. So these numbers are kind of baloney anyway, if you want to look at it, but I just wanted to run the math. Now, what would it look like if we did a specially designed whole life policy, and you could just look at this projected cash value number, and compare that with year 5, 10, 15, 20. All of this is in the document, so don't try to, look at it now. I'm just simply saying the numbers are here. But what I did is I compared them. So if we look at the policy, this is the 1% savings account, this is the 3% savings account, and the 4.5% savings account. Well, if we just look at the balance, well, our policy at the end of year 5 is 113 versus 122 versus 128 versus 132. Well, you might look at this and go, yeah, I don't know about this, Craig. I don't know if I want to put my money in this specially designed whole life policy because I can make more in a 1% savings account. But one thing that's happening is our death benefit continues to grow where this one doesn't. We're tax free over here where we're not tax free over here. So we have to kind of think about that as well. But by year 8, the policy exceeds the 1% savings account. By year 11, we exceed the 3%. By year 18, we exceed the 4.5%. But we have to remember these are kind of fictitious things because we don't have a savings account at a bank that's going to guarantee 3% or 4.5%. And I didn't include taxes in that number. All right. Now, the way I looked at this is what if we start taking distributions? What if we die? So there's a lot of other things to think about. And so let's just kind of run the numbers here. In the whole life,
I love this, by the way, Craig. I think this is a fantastic way to show it.
yeah, and in the whole life policy, I mean, we have, let's say at age 70, we've got 1.3, a death benefit of 1.8. In the 1% savings account, by age 70, we have 368. We'll actually run out of money at 80, whereas in the policy, we still have 1.3 and a death benefit of 1.6. So we depleted age 78, we depleted age 86 on this one, and depleted age 100 on this one. But even if you look at 100, would you rather be at 988,000 in the policy and 1.1? So these are definitely long-term thinking, long range, but I mean, who would rather be in this bucket versus one of these buckets? So we just ran the math, and this is kind of the reality of it. There's the winner. At least I would say that's the winner. You have $1.1 million of death benefit. Your balance in your cash value is still 981,000. And what we're doing is we're taking $55,000 of income from every one of these systems, right? So I've been consistently taking $55,000 from my policy. I was taking $55,000 of income from my 1% savings account. Ran out of money at age 78, but that's what I was doing to keep everything apples to apples. So let's go and look at age 95 if we have legacy to consider here. The whole life policy has $981,000 of death benefit. Now, Chris, how much of that is taxed? Or Stephen, how much of that is taxed on that death benefit, that 981,000?
Zero.
Zero.
None of it.
None of it.
You caught Stephen off guard.
Yeah, none of it. Zero. Zip, zilch. So we have 229,000 left in this 4.5% savings account, but that's taxable. And I'm not going to come up with the taxable number because it all depends on your estate. But at the end of the day, which one of these would you rather have from a legacy perspective? So I'm just going to run through one more use case, and then anybody else that wants to look at this can get the white paper and go through the math. But now what we're doing is we're looking at the S&P 500 returns from 1975 to 2009. And you'll see by buying the term, putting the rest into the market, we made a heck of a lot more than we did in the savings account. In year 30, we're at 1.2 million, and we still have a death benefit of 600,000. But again, at year 31, we have no more death benefit. And so the buy term invest the difference people would say, well, your assets will cover the death benefit, that you don't really need death benefit at that point. I'd rather have the death benefit. All right, so let's see how this kind of pans out. So what we're going to do is we're going to fund the policy. And for anyone that's seen these pictures before, essentially how the money flows is you're putting premium deposits into your policy. You're taking loans from the policy and putting it into your segregated account. Then we run that over into the S&P 500, and we're using the same returns, the ups and downs of 1975 to 2009. All the gains, losses, taxes, and fees come back in and goes back in the policy. So that's how we're kind of doing the apples to apples. And yes, the Vault software within a few weeks is going to have all of this gain, we call it the gain projector. You're going to be able to model this stuff out. So it's going to be super cool. But what does it look like? So we have our policy. We have our policy that's invested, and we have the S&P 500. So what I mean by the policy is these first numbers are we're just simply putting the premiums in. We're not doing anything with it. We're not taking any loans. We're not investing it. This middle box is actually funding the policy, taking the money and putting it into the market and writing the ups and downs. And then the last one is the buy term and invest the difference. So you can look at the balances here. At year 5, by doing absolutely nothing, we actually have more in the policy than we would otherwise with investing it. And why is that? It's because we had some loans, we had some loan, interest being stacked onto the equation. Now the policy is going to continue to grow no matter what if we're using it or not. But the reason the balance is lower is because we had some losses we had to take out of the picture. So when we look at this, the buy term and invest the difference at year 19 is kind of, we're the policy that's invested, we're kind of almost at a break even. So we have a 711 in the balance and we have 701 in the S&P 500. And the death benefit's pretty similar. But what we have to look at is at year 35, one of the things I was kind of saying is we grew to 1.245 by investing in the market, but we ended up at 1.2. So by taking that wild ride in the market with investing our policy, we actually gained a whopping 32,000. So it was just kind of a big interesting thing for me to go, wow, over 35 years by taking those wild rides up and down in the market versus just funding the policy and doing absolutely nothing, we still ended up about the same place, which was wild to me. So that doesn't mean that it's always going to work out that way. It's just that those S&P 500 returns at that time, that's how it turned out. Does anybody else think that's wild? I mean, just funding the policy and doing absolutely nothing with it. I mean, I thought that was crazy. And you know what this does, Chris? That whole presentation you did on the volatility buffer and covered asset, what it kind of means to me is if you're doing the market, we have a very large amount of cash that we can tap into while the market's down to provide for our retirement needs. And then when the market comes back out, we stop taking from the policy. And that's what that whole teaching was about.
Yeah, but then I went further and I added the infinite banking concept. I just said, listen, retirees still have cars and will probably upgrade their cars over the, every 5 years. So then I said, okay, instead of financing your car with the bank, use your policy that is there for the volatility buffer while it's not being used to finance your cars, and then make payments for the car the same as you would to the bank, make them back to the policy. And now all of a sudden you're making, I don't know, whatever the car finance rate would be, we'll call it 6%. You're making 6% on the money plus the interest and dividends you're earning on the compounding effect of the cash value. So, I mean, that was such a cool concept and a great video. And, Wade Pfau, who did the original white paper on the volatility buffer, kudos to him for paving the way on that.
Yeah, so there's other use cases that you can go through, and just for time's sake, we're just gonna kind of wrap this thing up. But the whole idea is, what we found through doing all these use cases is that whether you're funding the policy and putting that into the market, the policy of doing nothing and putting the policy money into the market kind of came out almost similar. And long term, it beat the pants off the buy term invest, the difference strategy. Now, Marco asked a question, well, how does this relate to real estate investing? And with what we're doing in the vault with this gain projector tool that we're adding into the vault, Marco, you'll be able to model all of this with your policy, with your lines of credit, with your cash, and you'll be able to put in any investment you want and put your returns in there that you want, and you can model all this out. So what we spent 7 months building in this buy term invest the difference, you'll be able to do a lot quicker with what we built in the vault. So it's pretty cool. But anyway, the we'll get that white paper out to anybody that wants it. Just hit that link. You can download it.
I just put the link in to book a call if any of you want to book a call with one of our mentors. And I want to finish with Storm's question because I think it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and finish with that, and I'm going to put the link in to get the white paper one more time. So if you want the 53 page, 7 months of number crunching, then go for it. Read at it. I'd um, love to hear your comments on it. And Craig says, "Yes, Craig, quit answering my silly questions and finish the game projector." So there's something in the name Craig, because Craig Parsons here that just put that. I mean, he's a number cruncher. We have a good time. Some people get together and take the guitars and jam. Sometimes we're jamming on spreadsheets, so it's good stuff.
Well, what Storm asked, and we'll finish on this, is Storm said, what is the purpose of the segregated account? We talk about a segregated bank account all the time. Really, the reason we did that is, I understand just by sheer nature, most people's checking account is like a black hole. I know any money that goes into my checking account, for the most part, it's kind of a zero-sum game. You pay your bills and everything out of it, and there's usually nothing left. So if we just had people take the loans from the policies, put them into their regular checking account, and then take the payments that they're recapturing from debt repayments, car financing through their own banking system, or whatever they're using it for, going back into their regular checking account, just by sheer nature of how we all use our checking account, there'd be no money left. So the segregated account was our attempt of segregating your private banking operations into its own account, which then becomes books and records for you. So if you ever were like, did I get a payment back for that? Did this work? Did the loan come in? How much was that? For tax reasons, for some reason, you have one bank account that the only numbers going, only deposits going in, and the only stuff going out is your private banking activity. So it really just creates a really uniform, streamlined approach to keeping all of your private banking activity separate, and we'll call it private, from all your other banking, like paying your utilities, buying groceries, going to the movies. You don't want all that activity coming out of your segregated account, because remember, your private banking system, using the infinite banking concept, should just be for things that allow you to take back the banking functions in your life. So that's really the reason we do that. So Storm, I love that you're working with Christy Van. We work with her a lot. We're filming again Monday with her, I believe. So you'll see some new videos coming out. And then your last part of your question is, should I pay off my debt, credit cards, from the segregated account or from my HELOC? So that's kind of a loaded question because I don't know enough about your circumstances. The Vault software certainly could just do it all for you, because if you've got the policy, okay, which is connected to your segregated account, and you've got your HELOC, the Vault would literally show you the most effective way to do that. And I would almost really tell you, Storm, that based on just your question, you need to get in the Vault. BYOB vaults. Craig will put it in the chat. I think that would answer your question. And the beauty is, I could give you an answer right now and say, well, it depends. Maybe you should use your segregated account, because the interest rate on the HELOC is X, but that would just be a complete, guess. I'd be giving you a hypothetical answer. The vault can actually give you the mathematically certain way to do it. So should I take money from my HELOC? Should I take it from my policy and use the segregated account and infinite banking to pay it off? Why don't we just mathematically prove it inside the vault, and it can do that. Craig, do you have anything you want to say on that?
And Storm mentioned that they have the vault already, and I remember seeing Storm's name in the 3-day, and so Storm, if you're working with one of our money mentors, they should be able to help you get in there and run with that. We also, this next Thursday is our next Cracking into the Vault with Craig and Marius. That's where, for the Vault subscribers, we get in, I think the last one went 2 hours, for crying out loud, but we typically do an hour of just answering questions with people that are in the Vault, sharing stories, talking about how you can do this, how you can do that. But Storm, if you don't have a money mentor, let us know in the Vault if you have some questions, and we'll connect with you and we'll get you some help.
Yeah. And I love that answer, Craig, because, most financial products force you to choose. We don't do that. And you could use both, right? You could use the HELOC and the policies in conjunction. So definitely allow us to help you a little bit with that decision and that question, because I think there's a really good answer. But at the end of the day, listen, like liquidity or growth, a lot of people have to look at those two things and decide. They have to say, okay, do I want liquidity or do I want growth? And they think that like they got to make a decision, but you can have both. It can be this and that. Safety and return. A lot of people are like, well, I want to go safe, but I want to return. You think you got to choose. You can have both, okay? So what I'm trying to say is it's not this or that. It's not the policy or the S&P. It's not the policy or real estate. It's the policy, the specially designed whole life, and real estate. The policy and investing. The policy and whatever. It's the combination of the two. And I think that's really well articulated in Caleb's book. Oh my God, I just spaced on it. But the and asset, almost said this and that, but the and asset. And IBC gives you that liquidity and growth. That's one of, I think, the biggest features of using the infinite banking concept is you get those two things, which are two very, very important things if you're trying to buy back your time and trying to get yourself to a place where your money's working for you 24/7. So folks, stop being a customer of the banking system. Okay, become your own bank, take back control of your money, let everybody else go to the banks and be, I don't want to say it, but be a slave to the bank, where you can be your own banking system. You can take back the banking functions in your life and start by just booking a call with one of our mentors. Just jump on a call, see how we can solve your problem. And the beauty is with the Vault software and what we've created with technology and AI, we can just prove everything for you. It no longer has to be a guessing game or, well, I think that would work, or yeah, this should work for you. It will be, this will work. This is how much interest you're going to save. This is how long it's going to take you to pay your debt off. This is how much cash flow you're going to have at that point. And this is how much your family's going to be protected for. No more guessing. Just pure mathematics. So folks, thanks for joining us today. And Craig, thank you so much for walking through the buy term invest the difference. And I loved one thing, so I can't remember who did it earlier. Somebody did take that and run it through ChatGPT and gave a summary. It was really cool to see that. So I challenge all of you to take your buy term invest the difference white paper, run it through your ChatGPT, try different prompts, see what it comes out. But I almost can guarantee you 100% of the responses from any of the AIs will be that buy term invest the difference is not the right strategy. And you should be learning about how you can be your own bank. And we'd love to be there for you. We'd love to help you with that. So book a call, get around the campfire, and you know what? We'll see you at 4:30 this afternoon for Ask Me Anything Happy Hour. Until then, have a good day.